Hey guys, it's Megan. So today I want to talk about the book that I just finished reading, which is Making It in America by Rachel Slade. And the subtitle is The Almost Impossible Quest to Manufacture in the USA and How It Got That Way. So I wanted to talk about this book on its own instead of just putting it into my monthly wrap-up video, partly because I've already read a lot of books this month, and so there's going to be a lot to talk about in the monthly wrap-up, but also because I think I have enough to say on this that it warrants its own video. So the basic premise of the book is that she follows a company that decides to make a completely American-made hoodie. So that's not where they start, but it's kind of where they end up as their goal, wanting to make a hoodie where everything is sourced and manufactured in the United States. And so I want to talk about why I think this book is such an important read, and then I also want to talk about just a couple of little kind of critiques I have of the book, or critiques I have of some of the concepts in the book. So this is going to be a recommendation. I do highly recommend people read this, but I've also, as you guys know, always have thoughts. So I have a few thoughts as well. So first of all, I want to talk about why I think everybody should read this book. Certainly everybody in the US should read this book. So one, it is a really accessible introduction into both US labor history and US foreign policy, particularly as it relates to US economic policy. And I think both of those, if you are running a business in the US or if you are a human in the US, I think these are both really important things to understand. So it goes into a lot about US labor history, how unions started in this country, the role that unions have played, the way that unions have been systematically dismantled in this country since the 1970s. And then going along with that, it talks about US foreign economic policy, the addition of NAFTA, the way that brought in offshoring, how we lost a lot of domestic manufacturing. It talks about basically the way that corporate structure has changed, and I've read some other books on that too. We'll talk about that in the monthly roundup next week, but it goes into a lot about corporate structure and how that has changed the way that businesses think about manufacturing in the US. So all of that, I think, is a very, very worthwhile read on its own. The second reason I think it's a really good and valuable read is because the company and the couple that it profiles, Ben and Whitney Waxman, they set out to build a company that was pro-labor, which is not a story that you hear a lot. So Ben's mother has a background in clothing manufacturing, in textiles, and then Ben himself worked in organized labor, worked for the AFL-CIO prior to starting his company. So what he did, or what they did when they set up this company, is they set it up to be very pro-labor. They unionized it from the beginning. From the beginning, they said, we are going to create a unionized workforce. And now part of what they did was then create products that they could turn around and sell to other unions. But you don't often see business stories where the business and the creators are pro-labor. Usually they are, pitted as antithetical to each other, right? It's business versus labor, it's capital versus labor. And so I think it's really good to see and read a story that is pro-labor, about a business that's pro-labor from the beginning, right? So I think that is a really important reason to read this book as well, because I think that we could really benefit from a world where we stopped seeing capital and labor as antagonistic together and looked at how we could have mutually beneficial goals. Because the reality is capital does need labor to exist, as much as capitalism is trying its damnedest to get rid of labor through automation. But at the end of the day, labor still matters. And so it's really nice to see this, cohesive relationship between the business and labor. So that's another reason to read the book. And then the last one, especially if you're not a maker, and I know that a lot of my audience are makers. And so I think if you're a maker running a maker business, this is really essential reading. But I really think it's essential reading for people who also don't make things, because it really goes into an understanding of all of the work and all of the effort that goes into creating something as simple as a hoodie, and it will help you understand why it should be so shocking that our clothing is so cheap, right? So in that way, it really follows the vein of books like Worn and Sundress, both of which I've talked about on my blog and read. But so if you have this interest in learning how clothing is made and produced, which as humans who wear clothing, I think you should, this is another nice introduction to that. Okay, So those are the reasons that I think that you should read this book. And again, highly recommend it. I absolutely think you should. But now I want to go into just a couple of critiques that I have of the book. And the first critique that I have is this like American centricity of the whole idea, of this whole idea of making it in America. So I'm not anti-making things in America. I want to be clear about that, right? Like, I'm an artist, I'm a maker, I make things in America. I coach people who make things in America. I'm also from a third generation of manufacturing in America. My grandfather founded a machine shop that my father still runs to this day, that my brother is in the process of hopefully taking over. My husband works in American manufacturing. I am definitely pro-American manufacturing, but I am also pro other manufacturing in other places in the world as long as it is ethical. And so that is, I think, one of the challenges of this. So they look into some of the issues of offshoring manufacturing from America and how that created problems, particularly during the pandemic, right? It really created supply chain issues. And so there's an argument to be made for bringing more manufacturing back to America from a national security standpoint. Fine, I get that. But for me, the kind of like critique comes in that I think that there's also a portion of this argument of like buy made in America because it becomes like a shorthand for ethical manufacturing. And I think there are two problems with this. So first is that ethical manufacturing can and does happen all over the world. And so if your goal is ethical manufacturing, as it should be, right? We're not limited to America, and we shouldn't be, because there are amazing things being made all over the world. And I don't think it makes sense for America to try to make any of them. So, or to make all of them. So I think about my experience going to India in 2014 and touring different facilities that did block printing. And on this trip, so first of all, I don't think that we should start block printing in America, right? Like in the way that they do in India. That is a very specific Indian craft. It is their cultural heritage. To say like, and I love that aesthetic and I think it's really beautiful. But to say like, we should make that in America so we can only buy American, that's definitely a form of colonialism and cultural appropriation, right? And so I think that it's really important to support things that are made in the places that originally made them. And then beyond that, the idea of manufacturing in America as inherently ethical is something that comes up in another book that I read this month. This book, which I'll talk about more in the roundup, but You're Paid What You're Worth and Other Myths of the Modern Economy. And Jake Rosenfeld, the author of this, what he argues, which I think is really interesting, is this idea that there aren't inherently good jobs and bad jobs based on industry. And that you can actually, any industry can make good jobs or any industry can make bad jobs. And it's all down to working conditions, pay equitability between labor and executives, quality of life, all of these things. Jobs can be good or bad, and it has nothing to do with what industry they're in. And so that critique, when you apply it to this book, is this idea that like it takes manufacturing in America as a default good job. And what he argues in this book is that there is no such thing as a default good job versus bad job. It all comes down to the conditions of labor. And this is something that I saw when we were looking at these block printing facilities in India. So we toured 3 different facilities. One was like a really boutique, high-end luxury, like very much seemed like the creme de la creme of block printing and seemed like arguably a very good place to work. We toured kind of a middle ground space, which also felt like a really good place to work. The owner, we met her. She seemed very, very good to her employees. There was a real openness to it. It seemed, again, like a good place to work. And then we toured and the owner was an Indian woman. And I think this is also kind of important because then we toured another facility that was owned by a white woman and who I believe was originally Canadian. And that facility just did not feel good, right? It was not up to a standard that certainly we as Americans would put as a good place to work. And setting aside the fact that while we were there, I felt incredibly uncomfortable because you had a bunch of predominantly white women in the group who were taking pictures of the workers in a way that felt really dehumanizing. And if we're honest, like super racist. Like I was actually really appalled by the behavior of the group that I was with and the way that we were interacting or not interacting, but just like voyeuristically taking in this facility. So setting aside that, which was its own problem, what that trip really showed me is that even within this industry, right, there are different ways to handle production, to handle the treatment of employees, the quality of the work, the quality of the facility that you're working in. And so I think that while, you know, having things made in America is great, it's only great if you're actually having ethical production. And I don't think we have to limit ourselves as American citizens to only buying things made in America, because ethical production can and should happen all over the world. And so, yes, I think it's important to support American made, but I think it's also important to support ethically made products anywhere in the world. And so I think that's like my one critique of this is I think it's super interesting, but I also I have a little bit of a cringe with like the made in America idea, because for me, yes, made in America is important, but so is made in Britain, so is made in Canada, so is made in India, you know, so is made in any place, as long as it's ethically produced. So that's kind of one critique I have of the book. And then the second critique I have of the book is that I think it really skates around the issue of perceived value, particularly in the textile world. So it does a good job of going into, you know, offshoring and the way that offshoring has, you know, impacted and basically like caused the cost of our clothing and our textiles to absolutely plummet, as well as the cost of a lot of our other goods. And it looks into the economic policies and the offshoring policies and everything that goes into that. But towards the end of the book, the owners of the business come to this conclusion. They're doing most of their selling to other unions. So they're going, hey, you're an American union. You need union swag. Your union should be supporting and buying American made. And even though it costs more, right? Even though our hoodie costs more. And so towards the end of the book, they come to this conclusion that, well, you know, we would actually be selling more if we could keep our hoodie prices lower, because how do we, with an $80 or $85 hoodie that ends up being like a $110 hoodie till the book is done, how do we compete when the union representative can also go out and find a hoodie for $29.99? And so the solution that they kind of come to in the book is that they need to be more efficient in their production processes. So they hire an industry expert who's known for his ability to set up manufacturing production, but particularly textile manufacturing production. And so they bring him in and he kind of is like, okay, here are all the tricks of the trade. And they're going, okay, well, these are the tricks of the trade that we actually don't like and that we didn't want to have in our business. And they feel really antithetical to what we're doing. And so they tried to implement some of them. And in the end, they didn't really quite work. And then they were sort of back where they started, and it didn't really address full scale, like how they were going to move forward. And I think there was a missed opportunity here. So if you are a union business selling to other union businesses, I think there was a missed opportunity for education to go, hey, you know, you understand that your union's workers deserve to be paid well. And so because they deserve to be paid well, the price is the price. Like, it takes as long as it takes, and the cost is the cost, and the price is the price, right? If you are a pipe fitter, it takes as long to fit a pipe as it takes long to fit a pipe, and this is what you want to pay your employees. And so with any kind of manufacturing, there is a limit to a humane work process, right? A human being can only do so much production humanely in a given day. And if you are paying your workers a living wage, then it takes as long as it takes, and the price is the price. And so I think there was an opportunity that seemed to be missed to educate the other union members on how this could work, one. And then two, I think there needs to be a better interrogation of perceived value in the textile industry, especially something that has come to be synonymous with women's work. So while they acknowledge in the book that unions are trying to broaden their base, that they understand that the future of unions are women, are people of color, who in a lot of mid-century unions those people have been excluded, right? The original origins of the labor movement in the US, they were very much involved, right? You had the International Ladies Garment Workers Union, you had the Pullman Union, which was the porters on the trains in Chicago. So you had unions that were women and people of color. But as we got into sort of like what a union looked like in the US in, say, the 40s and 50s, it came to be really dominated by white male industry. And so I think that there is a challenge where to go, hey, like you wouldn't want someone talking down your union prices. And so it's important to understand why our union's work costs what it is. And yes, that means that our hoodies are double or triple the price of what you're seeing on the market. But you need to understand that those prices that you're seeing on the market for this other hoodie are artificially low, and they're artificially low for a reason. And so at the very least, there should have been this more emphasis on education from like a worker solidarity standpoint. But I think that the way they were trying to position their company as this like ethically made, sustainably made, pro-labor production process, the solution isn't to be like, okay, how do we like carve out a little more from our workers? How do we do this? Instead, it's how do we have these conversations about how, yes, our prices are higher than what you're used to seeing, but that's because the prices that you're used to seeing are truly unsustainable. And the reason that you see these truly unsustainable prices in the textile industry is because the textile industry, the workers in it, were dominated by women and people of color and people in the global South who are ripe for exploitation. And so we have to acknowledge all of that and stop saying $110 hoodie is expensive and start saying $110 hoodie reflects the true cost of sustainably and ethically producing a hoodie. And so I really think that that is the one place where the book falls short. Is it like kind of hints at it here or there with explanations of offshoring and the ways that companies, drive down fabric production costs and clothing production costs to like the absolute bottom dollar, and how workers get exploited. And like that's pulled at in threads here or there, but it doesn't, I think the end really, really misses the opportunity to drive this home, both from the perspective of the business owners and their sales strategy and from the book itself. And so if there's one thing I would like to see more of in the book, it's this discussion of why the perceived value of a hoodie has gotten so low. What's really fascinating is that at one point there's a whole chapter where she talks about like how fantastic the hoodie is as a piece of clothing, right? Like the ways that a hoodie protects you from the weather and the way the hood is like so much more efficient than wearing a hat. Like she's reading it and I was like, yeah, damn, like go hoodies. Like hoodies are fucking awesome, right? And so there's all of that, but then I think there misses the discussion, like the really explicit discussion of why we have come to believe that $110 is too expensive for a hoodie. And again, I think they kind of pull the threads around it, but there's a missed opportunity to really drive that point home. So all of that to say, I absolutely recommend you read this book. I think it's really worthwhile. And I think it's a jumping off point for broader conversations about labor and price and perceived value and, where and how we produce the things in our world, and especially clothing. So those are my thoughts on that. If you guys want to see more book reviews, don't forget to like and subscribe. And I hope you enjoy this one. And I've got plenty more to say about the rest of the books I read this month coming up in a future video.